we're locked inside. So I made it a goal to make 10 melodies a day. And I did that for about 2 years. And I didn't miss a day. And what's funny is all those tracks are coming out like now. To be a musician, in the truest sense, music is all you have. He's sitting there playing a beat in one of the rooms, and he turns around and Kodak Black's been standing behind him for the past 25 minutes. I had no idea.
Welcome to the Made in the Studio podcast, where we spotlight some of the creatives behind your favorite songs. I'm your host, Desmond A, and today we have a special guest. Today's guest has produced for popular recording artists such as Kodak Black, Quavo, Skepta, Wright, Tory Lanez, and many, many more. It's with great pleasure that I introduce to the podcast multi-platinum producer and musician Ayo B. Ayo B, welcome to the podcast.
How you doing, bro? It's good to see you. Good to meet you.
How did you get into music initially, and then how did you get into production more specifically?
So music has been a lifelong thing for me. When I was about probably 3, 4 years old, I went to this little music school. It was like for kids. You learn, hot cross buns and Mary Had a Little Lamb. And so I did that for a few years, and I kind of took to it. My teacher said I kind of took to it. That was probably from age 3 or 4 until maybe 7. And I liked it. I was decent at it and I liked it. And so my parents put me in a piano lesson, and I started taking those when I was 7. And I took those up until the end of high school. And I didn't really like those. My teacher was kind of a hard ass, and she would yell at me, scream, but I knew it was good for me kind of. So I stuck with it. And when you're a teenager, you don't like that type of stuff, having to practice and, get ready for the week and all that stuff. But looking back, I'm glad I did it now. So that was for about 10 years I did piano lessons until I went away to school. Along that time, maybe when I was about 13, I taught myself guitar, just picked it up and since I knew piano, I kind of was able to pick up guitar. So I taught myself guitar, and then in school, I played the drum from like 5th grade on. I was in the percussion section of the band. So I kind of dabbled in everything, but piano and keyboard was like my main instrument since I was a real little kid. When I was in my 20s, I played in a lot of bands, like guitar, and I sang. I went through a hippie phase, like some hippie bands, and then some bands I played keys in. It's weird because when I grew up, I listened to like Wu-Tang and Dr. Dre and all that stuff. But a lot of the friends I had were into Fish and Grateful Dead, and that's kind of how I learned guitar. So I'd listen to one thing, play another. So it kind of gave me a wide array of stuff to listen to and get exposed to. After that, I needed money, so I started playing in a wedding band. So I would do gigs with this kind of professional wedding band. That wasn't too long ago, and I did that for a few years. But that was tough work. You got to pack up your whole keyboard, and you travel an hour or 2 for a gig, and then you get paid like $300 for a whole day of work. And meanwhile, I've been practicing for that show for 15 hours. So when you break it down hourly, it's not that much money. And I was struggling to survive. And so I did that for many years, kind of trying to scrape by as a musician. I should add, in my 20s, I worked as a scientist, but I only did that for about 5 or 6 years. And I kind of took the leap and said, I got to do music. This isn't really fulfilling me. I enjoyed the job. I was kind of making pharmaceuticals. So that was a little hiatus from music, but then I got back into it. Production, when I was younger, I used to always make beats. From the time I was like 13, I used to record like piano, drums, guitar, and then like bass on the piano or my keyboard. And so I used to make like these 4-track beats when I was younger. So I always liked doing that. I always liked making beats, but I didn't really know any of the programs. When I played in these bands, we would always go to studios to record, and I didn't know how to use like FL or Logic or Pro Tools. It all seemed so complicated to me. And then when COVID hit, I'm in the house. I'm like, I should just learn this program better. I had started using it in about 2016, 2017. And, you start learning the program. And then I met some people in like 2019 that were kind of connected to the industry. It was like Money Montage and Dr. Zeuz. And I met them in person through some connections. I was Mr. Cheeks, the rapper, is a good friend of mine. And he introduced me to a bunch of people down in Miami, and Zeus was one of them through someone else. And Montage is from up here in Albany. And so I kind of linked in with some people that were in the game, and I started playing melodies on the keyboard. We started building tracks together. And when COVID hit, we're locked inside. So I made it a goal to make 10 melodies a day. And I did that for about 2 years, and I didn't miss a day. And what's funny is all those tracks are coming out like now. This track I got coming out with Rick Ross on the 17th. That's from the COVID when I was locked in, when I was making 10 a day, and a lot of these Kodak ones that come out, I have a lot with Kodak, probably 20 songs. A lot of those are from 20 2020, 2021 when we were locked indoors. I tried to make the best of that time, and when you do a lot of that, just the repetition, you start getting better at the program and start getting fast at it, and at first, I was just making melodies for a couple years, and then I switched to learning how to make my drums hit and be a wide band producer that can make everything. So now I just make full beats, and I'll still send melodies to Zeus because he's so good at drums. I mean, he's the man when it comes to drums. He's basically my partner. We've been working together, pretty loyal to each other. We've been working together steady for 6 years now. But that's kind of how music went for me.
Some producers are right now they're kind of in that phase where they're working a day job or they're doing gigs and things like that, and they're trying to get to that point of stability. So what advice do you have for those producers who are, trying to live out their passions and at the same time they're either doing gig work or they're doing a day job? How would you
Yeah.
recommend that they, because consistency was a big thing for you as far as your success, so how would you
Yeah.
advise them on that?
Yeah, it's tough because the money, unless you're getting like tens of millions of streams, you're not going to really make a living. Um, my advice is, first you have to humble yourself. A lot of times you might be the best musician in the world and playing a gig for 10 people. It happens a lot. I noticed that with bands. I've been in great bands playing for 5 people at a bar. I've seen other great bands do it that were on labels playing for 10 people in a bar. So you have to humble yourself. It's a tough business. And you have to be willing to take the pain. It comes with some pain. You got to be willing to be broke for a while. You got to be willing to go through some hard times, and don't be ashamed to take a job. You can make music, but if you got to work for FedEx to make ends meet or something, or a construction job or some, regular type of work, do that. You got to get to where you want to be by doing what it takes to survive. And you got to be willing to make sacrifices, a lot of sacrifices. I went about 10 years with it. I turned my bedroom, I would live in small 1 bedroom apartments, and I would always turn my bedroom into a studio. So I didn't have a bed for like 10 years. I would just sleep on this old shitty couch, and, I would develop back problems and all that stuff that came with it. But you got to be willing to kind of really eat some pain. You got to eat it.
Right, right. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And, another point that you spoke on a moment ago was, your relationship with Mr. Cheeks. And, there's a lot of producers out there who like to just cook up in their bedrooms, and a part of them just are afraid to get out and network. And it seemed like
Yeah.
networking was a big part of your success in your career. So, how would you advise producers who, have a lot of skill musically, but they're afraid to get out of their bubble and actually meet people and shake hands and things like that?
You never know who somebody else knows. What actually happened with Cheeks was I was his brother, Mad Beats, is a producer that's up here in Albany, and he and I were kinda rooming together back in the mid-2010s, and I had known Cheeks because he was up in Albany, and he did a couple, features with our band, and, I got to know his whole circle, the LB fam and all that stuff. I'm close with all those guys. Cheeks and I went down to Miami, and next thing you know, I'm in his best friend, one of his best friends is Stephen Marley, and we stayed at Stephen's house for 10 days. And that's kind of when my career kicked off because that was probably like 2014. Stephen gave me all this advice, like these words of wisdom. He didn't take me through Pro Tools or anything and show me how to fade in a vocal track or whatever, but he gave me like the big picture. And one of the things he told me was what his father used to say was that to be a musician in the truest sense, music is all you have. Kinda you're not a musician in the truest sense till music is kinda all you have. That kinda goes along with what I was talking about, the sacrifice. He was telling me stories about how they used to make guitars out of milk cartons and chicken wire, and that's how you have to be able to willing to make music with whatever you can get your hands on. It's not gonna be big fancy studios all the time. It's not gonna be glamorous. Some of the best music I've ever heard made came out of dirty bedrooms and project housing or studios with one broken speaker and, a 10-year-old laptop. You never know. That's kinda how it works. These big fancy studios are just kinda for show, I think, a lot of them. You gotta make music with what you have. But to get back to your point, you never know the people you meet are gonna know. It's kind of a small industry when you look at it. There's not that many people that do this. It seems big from the outside, like when you turn on the Grammys or whatever and you see it's all glamorous and, "Oh my god, this is a huge thing." But you start meeting people and it's like, "Oh, they know them, and they know them, and I know them, and they know them." So, it's kind of the connections happen pretty fast within 5 years. And so my advice would also be to get out and meet somebody and don't worry about how many followers they have or if they're big, you know? Don't just go after some established producer trying to work with him. Work with anybody, you know? They might know somebody huge. They might be the best musician in the world and have 200 followers because they didn't get on social media, you know? You never know who you're gonna run into. This is not a type of thing where you're automatically on the Yankees because you're good, you know? So I'd say just get out there and meet people. That's the best way to get placements is really to meet people in person. Because if you're in someone's DMs, you know, it's really not that personal. A lot of people like I get a lot of DMs, you know, "Can I send you loops or starters?" And I try to respond to all of them, but the amount of messages I get, it's like you don't really put a face to it and you don't really follow up that much. But if you meet somebody in person, it makes a big difference. People remember your face, they remember your personality, they remember, you know, your energy, and if you can do something in the studio with them, they'll remember your skills, you know what I mean?
That was a lot of powerful information, man. So, producers listening, make sure y'all take notes because a lot of you guys have insane beats, but if you're not out there meeting people, what can people really do with that? What would you say was your first major placement in the industry?
Back when Mad Beats and I were producing, this is kind of around 2015-ish. I wasn't really working I started out on Reason because that's what Cheek's brother was using, and I kinda learned just messing around with it. We made an album, Stephen Marley had produced, like, 100 tracks with Cheek, and Cheeks gave me, like, 4 of them and said, "Let's make an album." So, Mad Beats and I kind of executive produced an album for Cheeks, and a lot of it was tracking down songs we had already made, but we made about 7 originals, and we recorded them in my bedroom, and some in Queens, and that was the first thing I did that was, like, you know, in the major league, and that album was called Raised, and it was a really good album, we're proud of it. My first major placement after Cheeks was in 2020. It was Ripstick by Kodak Black with Pooh Shiesty and Psycho Bob. That happened in May of 2020. And the way that happened was, Kodak had just been pardoned. He had just got out of jail. Dr. Zeus and I had been working for about 4 or 5 months, and we were making tracks for Drake actually, because he knew somebody who was associated with him. And he called me one day in May, and he said, "This crazy thing happened." Zeus is from Miami. So Zeus was in a studio in Miami, the one that Tory Lanez uses. And, he's sitting there playing a beat in one of the rooms, and he turns around, and Kodak Black's been standing behind him for the past 25 minutes. I had no idea, he'd just been standing there. He said, "Yo, that's fire," you know? And he said, "Oh, whoa, nice to meet you," you know? And they exchanged numbers, and he texted him the beat, and within, like, a month, that song came out. And Zeus and Kodak, became pretty close, and basically every album Kodak's put out since then, we've been on. So Zeus has some tracks with Kodak that he did solo, but most are with me. And there's probably I think there's over 20 that we've done with him. And that's been a connection we've kept for solid for the last 6 years. But that's kind of how it started. And then, you know, once that happens, you know how it goes, like, once that happens, people see that and they're like, "Okay, now I wanna work with you," you know? Now we're gonna fuck with you." So, that's kinda how it happened, and then after that, there was some, placements with Montage, like Dizzy Wright, and there's one by Skepta, Skepta and Chip and Young Ads, that found its way somehow to London, I don't even know how, but that was on an album in 2020 also. My advice is just keep making music that sounds good to you, and these things kinda fall into place. You know, I've never really chased a placement. It's just you be loyal, you be good to people, you don't be an asshole, and you make music every day that you like to hear, and it just falls into place. That's the only way I can put it, you know?
That's a great way to put it because, a lot of producers, especially newer producers who are just getting started, sometimes they think, okay, do I need to chase the most popular sound out there? Do I need to be true to myself and do what I really feel?
This is how it goes. Like, if you make music that sounds good to you, right? And you're a good musician, that means that whatever you just made is going to be good. If you don't have skills and it sounds good to you, that's probably not going to be good and you're probably not cut out for it. But if you're making music that sounds good to you and you have a good ear, other good musicians with good ears are going to hear the same thing. You know what I mean? And a lot of these guys that are in on the at the major league level, they all have really good ears. You might not think of it when you think of like rappers or whatever, but a lot of these guys pick up on key changes and melodic structure. These guys are more in tune with like theory and stuff than you think. They don't just get out and spit words. They hear pretty deep in the music. So if you're making stuff that's sounding good to you and you have a good ear, these other guys with good ears are gonna pick up on it.
Now, you mentioned there that you have like over 20 placements with Kodak Black. So, do you have a favorite placement of yours that like stands out that's your favorite?
My favorite song with him probably came out in 2021. I like the song "Closer," and I like 300 Blackout, which I think went gold recently, but my favorite song with him is "Closer." I just like the way that one sounds, and actually the one I used the same keyboard sound from "Closer" for this last one that just came out a couple weeks ago. It's just a sound in Omnisphere that I've always liked, and I think, Kodak likes it too because it's the second time he picked up on a same exact sound, you know? It's the song Deerfield. If you listen to Deerfield and Closer, it's the same exact sound.
Okay. Now you just mentioned Omnisphere. Do you have like a top 3 favorite instrument plugins that you really like?
I kinda like just like the piano banks and the B3s and those are my favorite. The piano sound's my favorite. I don't know, maybe it's because I grew up like that, but a lot of times I'll start a melody on piano and then switch the sound because it's comfortable for me. So I'll play something on piano, then I'll try other sounds of what I just played on piano. That's like a little trick I've done. Omnisphere is a lot because you can load it up with sound banks, you know, different sound packs that you get from people or whatever. Zeus tells me a lot that I don't pay enough attention to getting new sounds or whatever. You can kind of mess with these things and make them sound different if you EQ them, you take the top end off, you put effects on them. Omnisphere's got just about everything you need if you have enough sound banks. Or Alchemy I use Logic, so Alchemy's good too.
Okay.
A lot of stock Logic sounds are good.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. And with Omnisphere and any other really large, VST like that, once you start putting effects and filters on it, you're really making them your own. So now you mentioned also a second ago, upcoming Rick Ross placement. So how does that song come about? And what are some of your feelings on the instrumental? Like how did that happen?
That's another one of those Miami things. Zeus gave the track to Kodak's mix engineer slash manager, and he gave it to either Rick Ross's engineer or DJ Khaled's engineer, who then gave it to Rick Ross's engineer. So it got passed through like a bunch of people, and it found its way to Rick Ross's engineer. That one was from, I told you, from the COVID lockdown. That was from like 2020 when we made it. It was actually one of the ones we were making. We started off making for Drake and Tory Lanez when Tory Lanez was doing like an 80s thing back about 6 years ago, because Zeus is friends with him and has done multiple records with Tory Lanez. And like I said, they go to the same studio. That's the studio where Kodak was standing behind him. And so when I first met Zeus, the first 20 beats we made were 80s beats, and this was one of them. So the track's called City Lights. It's like an 80s kind of a synthy type sound with like one of those arcade vocals, and it's got like a synth bass. I love the track. I had forgotten about the beat pretty much because it's old, but that's how it found its way to Rick Ross's engineer, just passed around with people in Miami.
Okay. One thing you mentioned is, how much though that work you put in during COVID is starting to come to fruition right now. So as of now, as of today, do you have a certain quota of loops or beats that you set out to do each day or each week?
Not anymore. That was like a 2-year thing. I did it for 2 years and made about 7,000 loops in 2 years, which is like enough to last a lifetime practically. Like I have more than I know what to do with. And so I kind of switched to making I kind of switched it up. Now, if I make a loop, I'm spending a lot of time on it. Like I'm spending hours on it. One of the other things I'm doing is I've formed some relationships with other people who make these, and I'm kind of flipping their loops. I have fun doing that. They'll send me loops, and I'll take them, I'll break them down, or I'll add stuff and try to make them sound better, and then ship them out. And I've been doing a lot of remixes for artists, like dance remixes. I don't know. I guess I kind of got burned out with loops, as you can probably imagine.
Yeah.
I still do them, but I wanted to get better at drums. I wanted to make full beats, which I do now. I wanted to make more songs as an artist. I wanted to do different things, and I wanted to work with more people where I can collaborate, you know? The loop thing was kind of like it was like a 2-year binge thing. And once you have 7,000 loops, I probably have about 10,000 now, but once you have 7,000, that's a lot, you know? It's enough to last a long time.
Yeah, man. That's insane.
Yeah.
So, whenever you're listening to new producers' beats and production, what's one mistake that you tend to hear in newer producers' productions that kind of gives them away that this is a newer producer and you kind of wonder if you could jump in, you wish you could go ahead and correct them?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest mistake is trying to sound like other people. Like, if you make something like I said it to Zeus the other day. He sent me like a song. He's like, listen to this. And I was like, are they still making this shit? Because it sounds like the same shit from 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago. And so I think that one of the biggest mistakes is producers hear something that is popular or has been popular and think that if I make something that sounds like this, it will be popular as well. Now it might work in some cases, but it's not gonna drive you forward. It's just gonna get you like probably like you might get lucky and land one, but it's not gonna put you any place special. It's not gonna put you out there as like a creative type of producer. You gotta kind of push boundaries a little and get creative. And a lot of these big artists, that's what they want. They want stuff that sounds out the box a little. They don't want that, the C minor arpeggio and, all that stuff that's been going on for 10 years. So that's one of the biggest mistakes I see. And the other one would probably be key selection. A lot of these keys don't sound good with 808s. Like somebody will put a beat in like A minor with the low A, it's the 808, and that thing doesn't hit. You want to be at the A sharp or you want to be at the D, but I never go below the A sharp. And you want to be around the D or the F or even the C. But like I hear some of these, and the 808 is so low, it's like that's not even going to sound good, especially on a phone. So I hear some of those, and I think a lot of these producers, some of them, not a lot, some of them aren't paying attention to the key they're picking and how it's going to relate to the 808 and how that's going to sound. I think you got to pay better attention to that. If you hit the F or the G, you're in the money.
Now, speaking of that, since you do have a musician background, do you recommend that producers spend some time learning some music theory, or do you feel like it's optional? How exactly do you feel about that?
So I always took it for granted, I learned it when I was young because I took piano lessons, and so I kind of visualized the keyboard. When I play a chord, it just triggers in my mind what it is. What I think people should do is try listening to something and play along with it, and learn piano that way. That's how I learned guitar. Listen to stuff and try to play along with it. That's the best way to learn an instrument, is to hear something and try to play along with it. And the other thing I'd recommend is when you're playing something on the keyboard, if you don't know theory, take like 30 seconds just to go look it up or pay attention to what you're playing. If you're playing a D minor and you're not aware of it, you just lost a learning opportunity, because next time you see that, it would register that it's a D minor. And once you start doing all these chords, your brain will start putting together how they relate, and next thing you know theory. Basic theory isn't all that complicated. There's only 12 notes, and so if you learn all the triads, you've probably played all the triads in your life at some point. So if you pay attention to what you're playing or take some time to figure out what it is you just played, you're gonna know theory pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's definitely a gem because it seems like some producers make happy accidents and then they don't take time to reverse engineer what they did. And like you were saying, if they took some time to learn that they just played a D minor, now they can
Yeah.
still that in their mental toolbox and move forward with that. So yeah.
Your ear is more important than theory for sure. Like, you ear isn't. In all of music, your ear is the most important thing. But theory can only help you. It's not gonna hurt you. So it'll make you work faster. It'll make you more adept at fixing things, changing things. If something needs to get shifted, you'll know where to put the fifth, stuff like that. So theory's never gonna hurt you, but there's some people that think theory is the end all be all. It's not, but it's gonna help you if you take some time to learn it.
What's one thing about music production that you know now that you wish you knew at the very beginning?
Aside from how compression works, probably how important simplicity is. I don't know if people do this, but you'll make a beat or a track and you'll have like 4 or 5 layers, and all of a sudden you take out three and it sounds better. Not only leaving space for the artist, but the whole thing just sounds better when it breaks down. I think it's a good thing to layer your sounds when you're building a beat because you'll have more to work with. But once you layer those, take a few out, and you might have 5 tracks that are music, and you take out 2 or 3, and you can pick different ones to take out. But once you get to that simplicity level, that's gonna sound a lot cleaner. I think the key to making good music that people like the mass of people like to listen to is stuff that's simple, tight, clean, concise music. You can layer something with a million things that sound good with one another, but you gotta remember who you're making it for. You're making it for people that don't know music, and they're not gonna appreciate what you did interpolating those 3 tracks.
I kind of look at it as like there's sophistication and simplicity. So
Yeah.
sometimes producers will cook up a beat and load it with all this stuff and impress themselves and impress other producers.
Yeah.
But once you start hitting that mute button, it's cleaner, then the vocal can just slide right in there.
Yes.
So you've been in the music game, you've been doing a lot, you have a ton of placements. So what's one of the biggest myths about making it in the music game that you feel like beginners still believe about the music industry?
The biggest myth is that a lot of people have already made it and they don't know it yet. I think if your music reaches a level where any artist can get on it, if it's once your music is good enough for anybody to get on it, I consider that having as you made it. It just hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened in the timeline yet. So it's not about when that first placement lands with Drake or whatever. If you're not very good at your craft and somehow you catch a lucky one and something dissonant gets picked up by Drake, but you aren't very good and can't. I consider that less making it than somebody who's really good at music, who makes quality stuff all the time that anybody could get on that hasn't landed a major placement yet, because that's likely to happen in the future. A lot of people might be down on themselves thinking they haven't made it yet, and it's like, dude, your stuff's disgusting. It's great. You've already made it. It just hasn't happened yet. And for a lot of kids, it's in like their early 20s and they got a lot of time ahead of them. So it's like trust that time will bring you there.
Right, right. That's definitely a good answer. There's a lot of talented people out there, and they see all the stuff on Instagram. They feel like, well, why am I not there yet? And you
Yeah.
just keep grinding, keep grinding.
Yeah.
You're already there. You've been out there. You've worked with different musicians. You work with different producers. So, what's one common trait that you notice in those successful producers, in those successful artists that you've been around? And what I mean by that is if you see this trait, you're like, okay, this person's gonna go far. And if you don't see this trait, you're like, this person's gonna be here today and gone tomorrow. So what's that one thing that you tend to notice?
It actually doesn't have much to do with music. It's humility or lack of humility. It seems that if you get ahead of yourself and start thinking you're, this amazing, famous musician or whatever, or you somehow are better than people, or you got all this motion and this person doesn't, and you got more motion than them. If you start into that mindset, that's a one-way ticket to being irrelevant in like 10, 15 years. I think the lack of humility is the biggest danger for any producer or artist in the music business, because you might not think people notice that, but they notice it and they're not going to want to work with you. You got to be loyal to the people you work with, and you got to be humble about it. Music is a spiritual thing. It's an art form. It brings you closer to God. It brings people happiness, joy, emotion. This is not about your ego or to make you feel better about yourself. You know what I mean? This is a calling almost. And if you disrupt that by making this about how you feel about yourself, I think that's not good for where you're gonna wind up. So I think lack of humility is one of the biggest things that'll kill you.
One thing with that, you when we first started speaking, you spoke about, really the grind, putting in all the work. And then if I look behind you, I see all those billboard plaques. So it's like, how do you maintain your humility when you've gone from one point to all the way up here with the billboard plaques? So how do you maintain your level headedness with all the accomplishments?
The way I look at it is like I still haven't made it to where I wanna be. I know I have, but it's like I'm always setting a goal ahead of myself. And so it's like you get a gold record or a Billboard #1, and within like a month, it's like, okay, well, what's next? In my mind, at least. And so it's not like I feel like I'm not doing enough, but I guess it's a drive that keeps me humble and makes me feel like I'm not, on top of anything yet. Like I still have ways to go. And if you still have the mindset that you have a ways to go, that's going to automatically make you a little humble. It's not about taking over the world, but it's about wanting to push yourself to do better. And if you start getting comfortable, like, oh, I've made it, I've arrived, I'm here, I've done all these things. If you start focusing on that, you're going to get lazy too, you know?
Speaking of that, speaking of humans and our relationship with music and things like that. So, a big point of conversation these days is AI and music production. So, what are your thoughts around AI and using AI in music production, music compositions? What do you think about that?
I've actually used AI in some of my dance remixes. The way I've used it is to get sounds sometimes, like I'll play a string part and I'll throw it in there and say, just replay that exactly as I played it, and you'll get a different sound. I think that's an acceptable use of AI. If you play it and use it as a sound bank, I think if you're having it write you lyrics and chord progressions and producing your track for you, that's fine if you want to, but I mean, who are you cheating? You're cheating yourself, you know? You're only cheating yourself. If you're using it as a tool, like a sound bank to make your creation sound better, like you would using Omnisphere, I find that acceptable. And I don't fault people for using it because a lot of people are just not born with any type of musical gift, and they want to make music and it's unfortunate. So let them have their fun. I don't fault them for it. I don't think people should be talking down upon them that much. I don't think it's that much of a plague. I think real human art is gonna shine through at the end of the day. I've heard AI music, you could tell it's AI. It's not gonna take over. That's what I think is acceptable use as far as maintaining your artistic integrity, and I think it should give these people a break that really can't make music, who wanna express themselves somehow. And the other thing I want to touch on though is these lawsuits, which I think are pretty well based. AI trained on all the music we made. That's how these were programmed. That to me is theft. I mean, you can't build a whole company using everybody else's music to train your system and then give them no money and take all the money. That's crazy for me. So on the other hand, I wouldn't be mad if they just shut them all down. It wouldn't upset me. I wouldn't feel bad for them. If people who can't make music want to use it, let them. It's not hurting you. It's not going to be. If you're a good musician, you should be confident in your abilities, and you should be confident enough that that's not going to be better than the stuff you're making. That you can express yourself better than a computer.
That's definitely a balanced approach to AI because some people are totally one way or totally another way, but your approach is a bit more measured. Now, let me ask you this. So, what's one thing that you wasted years focusing on that beginners should stop worrying about right now? So, if you were to speak to an earlier version of yourself and there's this thing that you're doing, and you wish you could say, "Hey, stop that. You're wasting time on this. You need to focus your energy on something different." Was there anything there when it comes to music production? Like, man, I wasted time doing that.
Yeah. What I wasted a lot of time on is trying to figure out how a compressor works just by using it and not by reading about it. Like 3 years toying with compressors, figuring out what the attack does and what the release and the knee and all that stuff does, instead of just going and reading about it. What a waste of time that was. And eventually you figure it out, but it takes forever. I think I wasted a lot of time not when I was learning, not just going on YouTube and saying, "What does this do? What exactly does this do? How can I learn it?" There's something to be said for repetition and figuring stuff out yourself. If you don't know how something works on your DAW, go look it up. Don't skip over it and don't try to play with it for a month to figure it out. I wasted too much time doing that. I would have been a couple months, maybe a couple years ahead of where I am.
Compression is a tricky thing, man. So it even took me a while to hear compression right. So I had to take time making dramatic moves and then finally hearing, oh, that's the attack and oh, that's the release. And that's how. So yeah, I definitely feel you on that. So AOB, let me ask you this. Where do you see your career going in the next 5 years?
I don't know. I never plan it out. As someone who quit drinking, I take it one day at a time, you know? It's like one day at a time. You get up, you work, you make music that sounds good to you, and whatever happens in the future, you've done the best you could do that day to put yourself in a position to do well the next day. In 5 years, the placements could dry up. In 5 years, I could have 50 more. I have no idea of predicting what's gonna happen. So the best I can do is just get up and enjoy what I'm doing and try to work every day and make the best music I can, you know?
Being that you've worked with, so many talented artists in the game, do you have a particular dream placement that you would like to have? Is there any particular artist or artists who you're like, "Ooh, I'd really like to work with this person"?
Not really. No. If it happens, it happens, you know? If someone I respect as an artist, I'll be thrilled. If someone that I respect as an artist picks up my music, like I always am, it's like, it's so fun, when something comes out, it's like the night before it comes out, you hear the track. That's part of the fun of it. And there's really no artist I've ever tried to like, oh my God, I got to work with him. I got to work with him. It's almost like a self-contained work ethos where I just try to make stuff, like I said, I try to make stuff that sounds good to me, and if that person thinks it sounds good and they wanna jump on it, and it happens, you know?
ALB, what projects do you have coming up that the producer community should be looking out for?
Yeah, so, right now, well, the 2 songs with Kodak came out on that album on the 12th, and then there's Rick Ross coming out on the 17th, and then I'm sure there'll be more with Kodak because 'cause he's got a lot of unreleased stuff. There's tons of unreleased tracks that he has, and he'll put more of those out. I did a remix for this Italian artist named Anthony Lazzaro. That's coming out in the summer. He's like a jazz type artist, but I remixed one of his songs into like a dance track, and that's coming out. He's big in Italy. He's a big Italian artist. That's coming out in the end of the summer. And what else I got? Anything? That's all I know about right now.
We definitely appreciate you spending your time with us here at the Made in the Studio podcast. Now, another question I have is, do you have any last and final words of encouragement for the music production community?
Keep working every day. Try to outwork everybody. Always try to outwork everybody. Don't get discouraged, especially if you're on the younger end and you're just getting started. It might take a little time. And like I've been saying throughout this whole interview, make music that sounds good to you. Don't worry about making music that sounds like somebody else who got some motion. Don't worry about making music that this artist might like because you never know what they're gonna like. Don't discard old beats ever, and don't minimize something you've made just because if it doesn't sound good to you, it might sound good to somebody else. It very well might happen. So don't forget about that.
Also, AOB, where can people reach you online? It's just going to be on Instagram or where
Yeah.
is you?
I'm on Facebook, Instagram. It's AYOB Key. AOB Key. That's my handle everywhere.
All right, perfect. Then, ladies and gentlemen, listening to the podcast, I'm gonna have links to AOB so you can find him, follow his music, listen to his musicianship, listen to his songs as a recording artist, and really listen to someone who's in love with the craft, in love with the music, and does this for a living and does it from his heart. So, AOB, man, thank you so much for dropping so
Thank
many
you.
gems. Thanks for joining the Main Studio podcast. You have a great rest of your day.